Hey there guys, the Network Berg here. Hope you've been doing well. So I'm back with another video, and this is going to be quite a fun one because this is just some more real life type of scenarios that I'm applying onto a video just to showcase you how to configure certain services between different vendors' platforms. We're mainly going to be looking at between Juniper and MikroTik, where we will be configuring some QnQ concepts so that you can see how we can deploy QnQ from a Juniper towards customer edges, so we can provide different services to customers, because it is awesome. It's necessary in the industry, especially in ISP spaces, or maybe even very large enterprises to be able to do this. So I hope you have fun watching the video, and I'll catch you inside the lab now. So let's quickly look at EVE-NG and the different solutions that we're trying to deploy. The first one being where we manage the customer presence equipment. So maybe we put down our own little MikroTik there that the customer just connects their switches to, and we actually manage the whole LAN network and stuff for them as well. And we get to just configure everything end to end. Really nice and easy to understand. But there's also a second type of scenario I want us to run over, which is the unmanaged type of solution, where you might put something down like a EDD or an Ethernet demarcation device. And I want you to just think of that just as another switch, basically. It's just there to put down at the customer site where you can connect your link into, so that you can monitor the link and you can manage things more effectively, and you can just hand the services off directly from this EDD to the customer, to their router or device, because maybe they've got another MikroTik or another Juniper or a Cisco or whatever they want. It really doesn't matter, just as long as we can hand services off to them and we can tell them, hey, you can connect to this port to be able to do this, or that you can tag this VLAN to your interface, and you should also kind of be able to do the same thing. Now that just kind of illustrates the different solutions. I also want to talk about aggregation switches quickly, and I just want you to think of this as a switch that might be sitting at a point of presence or a POP. That could be a telephone exchange, it could be a data center, it could be anywhere really, but think of that as the place where the link actually terminates on, all the way from the customer site, going through all of those different exchanges and all kinds of things. It eventually needs to terminate somewhere. It needs to plug in somewhere at the end of the day. Now, many times you might patch in directly onto your provider edge. It could just be another big Juniper. It could be another MikroTik. It could be all kinds of things, but maybe you are very port conscious and you want to save some ports. This is where an aggregation switch comes into play, because now you can use a nice big beefy 100 gig interface, or maybe you can trunk big interfaces, bring it into the aggregation switch or aggregation switch stack, and then you just terminate all of the customer connections into the aggregation switch. And then it makes it really straightforward. You just need to configure everything on an aggregated or a trunked interface on your provider edge, in the Juniper in this instance. Now I have configured two separate links to two different aggregation switches, although I really didn't need to. We could have maybe just collapsed that into a single point, but I do want to basically just illustrate the different type of configuration steps involved with everything, and I think this just highlights everything a little bit better on the topology. Now let's get into the setup, because once you actually see how we configure things, I think it clicks a lot better. It makes a lot more sense, because here you can see stuff like I've got an outer VLAN tag, and I've got stuff inside this outer VLAN, namely VLAN 10 and 20. Now what I want you to think about when it comes to VLANing, especially QnQ, why do we want to do it again? Well, it allows us a way to manipulate or better configure our VLANs, because if we had to individually give each customer a VLAN for each and every one of their services, because maybe they have multiple services, maybe they have transit, maybe they have layer 3 services and layer 3 VPNs and all kinds of stuff, maybe they have voice services, and it really racks up very quickly, especially in your larger areas where you might have hundreds if not thousands of customers. Then you could potentially run out of VLANs. And QnQ is just one of those methods that ISPs have kind of figured out, kind of like with NAT as well, where we could just say, hey, how about we just take one VLAN ID, we say VLAN 100, we assign that VLAN to the customer site, and then inside that VLAN we can perform QnQ trunking, so we could assign more VLANs inside that VLAN, and the switches and the customer and the network is kind of only aware of that outer VLAN, the VLAN 100, even though we're deploying multiple services inside like an additional VLAN 10 and 20 to the customer. It's just one of those cool little methods that people figured out over the years. So let's actually configure this stuff now. So I'm going to jump onto this provider edge device. It is a Juniper. I think I just factory reset it as well, so it has nothing. So we're just going to run through the setup very quickly. We might get spammed by some auto image upgrade things, so let's just quickly get that out of the way. So let's just delete chassis auto image upgrade, and let's just set a password quickly. And this password can be anything. It's just so that we don't get spammed by the system and you need to set a root password the first time you log into the device. So now we can actually start making changes and shape it however we want. And if I look at the topology, I've got a GE000 running to my aggregation switch 1, and I've got GE001 running to my aggregation switch 2. And it's very important again to note these outer and inner labels, because that's kind of like what we want to use when we do the configuration. We're going to define an outer label on a logical interface of the Juniper, and then we're also going to set the inner label, and then we can associate that with some IP addressing just to test as well to make sure that things work. So let's get back onto the CLI, and what I could do is set our interfaces GE000, and I can define a logical unit, maybe unit, let's make it 100, just for our own ease of sake and use and whatnot. And I could make this maybe VLAN-tags. This is the important bit with the Juniper configuration, that tags, because it kind of implies a plural. There's multiple tags we're configuring here. And then I can set an outer tag, and I'm going to make that outer tag 100, because the VLAN is going to be 100 in that instance. Then I can also just set an inner tag, and this could be the service inside that I want to use. So I said I want to maybe use VLAN 10, and that's going to be for our data services. I'm going to hit enter, and then I'm just going to hit the up arrow key quickly so we can maybe just assign an IP address for this as well. So unit 100, family INET address 10.101/30, because I kind of denoted that on the topology what the IP addressing is going to be. So don't be too worried, but you can really use any IP addressing that you want as long as it works in your network. So let me hit enter, and then I can also just hit the up arrow key again. And now I need to jump on a separate unit. So I might use maybe unit 101. And again, it's just a logical unit. This can be anything you want. It doesn't need to correlate directly with the VLANs that you're using. It's just kind of one of those cool things on Juniper. So now we can specify our VLAN tags. The outer tag is still going to be 100, but our inner tag this time, I'm going to make that inner 20, and that's kind of for our voice. And I can just also do the same type of thing where I can specify a family INET address 10.111/30. And there's actually something else I need to set for the interface. So we need to set our interface GE000. I do want to set an encapsulation for flexible Ethernet services, because that kind of allows us to do the sub interfaces and stuff. And we also just want to set the same set interface GE000 for flexible VLAN tagging. And that kind of just is what makes the configuration works now. And let's also do the same type of setup quickly on our GE001. So I can just up arrow key that quickly. GE001. GE001, kind of nice that we can just quickly kind of copy the config like this. And let's quickly add our config as well. So GE001, I'll use the same type of units as well. So unit 100, VLAN tags, but in this instance, I'm going to be using a different outer VLAN tag, even though it's a different interface. So I could kind of still use VLAN 100, but let's use 101, because let's say it was going to the same type of aggregation switch stack. And we can tag the inner as 10, and then I'm just going to up it again, use a different unit, 101, make that inner 20, and then let's quickly set our family INET address 10.211/30, and then unit 100 for GE001 is going to be 10.201/30. I'm just going to do a show compare And apologies, I'm working with two different types of keyboards. The UK English and the American English, it's very different. It's so interesting actually. But there we can see the baseline of the configuration. It's actually pretty straightforward if you think about it. We're just going into an interface. We're setting flexible VLAN tagging and the encapsulation for flexible Ethernet services. And we're just defining a logical unit. Think about it for each VLAN, for each service almost, because we can then use this unit later on and put it in a VRF or route with it or do all kinds of cool stuff with it. But for our instance, we're just going to test and see if we can ping across the link and see if stuff works. Then we've got our VLAN tags defined as an outer and an inner. And we've set our family INET address. And it's just kind of the same config, just for a different inner or a different unit. It doesn't really change anything else. So that is the configuration on the Juniper. Nice, easy, straightforward. We can just commit this change and it should take it. There we go. Very happy with that. Now we need to actually configure the aggregation switches as well as the CPEs. Now I do have Winbox, or I did have Winbox open. So let's just quickly open up Winbox, Binbox. And here I can see my devices. Now the first thing that I want to configure is maybe this aggregation switch 1, which was at the top with the CPE 1. So let's jump onto AGG 1. And I'm not going to worry too much about setting passwords or anything like that. But the important bit is that I want you to understand we're going to be doing a little bit of the switching now as well. And when it comes to switching, we're going to be working with the bridge settings on the MikroTik. So there's a few ways to do it. I can also highly recommend watching Druvis's video on the MikroTik channel. He showed different ways how you can effectively use QnQ in the network. But what we're going to do is we're going to be using the bridge, and we're going to be using an option called tag stacking, because I find this works the most effective when I'm deploying this type of solution for customers. So all that we're going to do is let's add a bridge. And if you are using a switch out of the box by default, it should already have the bridge interface with all of the ports bridged. But I'm just quickly going to bridge my ports. So Ether 1 and 2 is going to be a part of this bridge. Ether 1, Ether 2, because if we look at the topology, sorry about that, I don't know why I opened up another tab. If we look at the topology, all right, apparently I can't get back to that tab, so let's just quickly open up another window. 192.168, there we go. So we can see Ether 1 and Ether 2. So Ether 1 goes to our PE and Ether 2 goes to our CPE. So these are effectively our connections to get to our network and to the network that's at the customer side. So this is just all that I need to add to our bridge. In the bridge, again, it's very important that we make sure that we enable VLAN filtering. And there are different types of Ethernet, but we're just going to be using the plain old QnQ, like we're going to tag 0x8100 inside 0x8100, so don't worry too much about anything else there. We just need to make sure VLAN filtering is enabled. And then inside our ports, there's a few things we can do here. So if we look at the topology again, we know that Ether or on GE000 from the Juniper, it's basically sending or forwarding VLAN 100 frames to the switch. So we should tag VLAN 100 on Ether 1 of the aggregation switch, which kind of makes sense. It's very straightforward, very easy. So what I can do is in the VLAN settings, I can click on the plus and I can just make sure it is the right bridge, but technically there should only be one bridge. And then our VLAN IDs, this was going to be 100, and we need to make sure it's tagged for Ether 1 because we are expecting tagged frames from the Juniper on VLAN 100 on Ether 1. So we can also untag Ether 2, which is going to the customer premises for VLAN 100. That means that they, on the CPE, we don't need to configure VLAN 100 and then you configure sub VLANs on the VLAN itself, because then we're kind of messing about. It doesn't work as nicely when we just define stuff on the interface directly. So I'm going to untag it on Ether 2, but we also need to make sure inside our port settings that Ether 2 when I go to its VLAN tab, I set the PV ID to untag it for 100. It's kind of like this is where you need to untag the interface for what VLAN it needs to be in. This is kind of where you set the access port, but you kind of set it in here as well. But I think if you set it in the ports, it should automatically show that it's untagged in Ether2 here, but your results may vary. I would just suggest applying the configuration to make sure it works. And that should be the configuration on the aggregation switch. Now you can see I haven't configured anything else on the aggregation switch. I'm literally just bridging Ether 1 and 2, and I've defined how I want to tag VLAN 100 over Ether 1 and how I'm untagging it towards the CPE so that the CPE just gets untagged frames. It's kind of just on VLAN 1. It can communicate on whatever it wants to. So if I jump onto the CPE now, so let's just open up a new Winbox session. And on CPE 1, if I connect, I'm not going to set a password. I'm just going to zoom in quickly. And then on the CPE, what I could do is add an IP address. Actually, before I add IPs, I do want to add VLANs in this instance. So maybe I'll add VLAN 10 and VLAN 20, which were those inner VLANs. You see, I'm not defining VLAN 100 anywhere on this CPE. So I'm just going to add the VLANs. So I can click on the drop down, go into my VLANs, and I can call the first one data, set it for VLAN 10, and I'll tag it on Ether 1. And then I could just copy the same thing, set this for voice, make that VLAN ID 20. And now let's add our IP addresses, which is so quick and easy to do. So that is going to be 10.102/30 for our data. And it's going to be 10.112/30 for our voice. Perfect. And now let's quickly test and see if it works. I've got a suspicion it's not going to work, and I also know the idea why it's not going to work. But let's just test it and see what happens. So let's ping 10.1.0.1, which is the Juniper's IP address on the provider edge side. So I'm doing my ping. Well, you know, it's failing. And I can also just do a ping to 10.1.1.1, which is also for the voice. And it's still failing. So why is it failing? Well, if you think about it, while we were talking and I was showcasing the switch configuration, I mentioned something about tag stacking and Druvis's videos and stuff like that. We didn't actually enable the tag stacking option for where we're expecting the tags to be stacked on. So I can go back onto the aggregation switch. And if you think about it logically, let's go to the topology again. I'm actually stacking VLAN 10 and 20 coming from this Ether 1 interface on the CPE 1 going into Ether 2. So I've got multiple tags there. So I can effectively enable tag stacking on Ether 2. And that should fix this. This should actually make everything to start to work. So let's enable that. So I'll go into my bridge settings on the aggregation. I'll go into the ports. And then on Ether 2, which is untagged for this VLAN 100, I'm just going to click on this tag stacking, enable it, hit the apply. And once I've done that, if I go back to the CPE, let's quickly test now and see, can I ping 10.1.0.1? And there we go. That first one is just a little bit slow because it's doing its ARP and all that business, but we're getting traffic from one end to the other end. And the same case, if I ping to 10.1.1.1, it's pinging across. We've got services. And this, again, now allows us to do many cool things where we can put these in different VRFs and play around with things in a much bigger fashion. And it's really so awesome to see this work. So that is just the one type of solution. Solution 2, again, this is just where it runs to an EDD, and it still actually is the same type of configuration. You're still going to be doing exactly the same stuff. It's just you need to remember that you now have an EDD on site at the customer's premises, and you're kind of just doing one more extra step when it comes to the VLANs. So let me just close the Winbox sessions to the other MikroTiks at the top. And then let's connect to the AGG2. And then on AGG2, very simple, very easy. And it's the same type of setup. We're just going to go into bridge, add a new bridge. We're going to also just make sure it does have VLAN filtering enabled. Going to quickly add our ports, which is Ether 1 and Ether 2. So Ether 1 and Ether 2. And this is on the aggregation switch now. So what I can do is I can go into my VLANs. And we know that I am expecting VLAN 101 because that is what I defined on the provider edge on its GE001 interface. And I'm just going to tag that on Ether 1. And I'm still going to untag that on Ether 2 in this instance. You could technically also tag it all the way through to the EDD and then start doing things from there. But I find this is a lot easier if you just treat the EDD just as another CPE, and then you can just do the VLAN tagging from that EDD. So I'm going to just untag it towards the EDD. And I'll also just set Ether 2 on VLAN. I'll set it to 101 as the untagged access port, and I'll also just enable tag stacking. So that's been done. Then I'm going to navigate to the EDD now. So I'll just open up a new Winbox session. Go into the EDD1. Cancel this. And now if you think about it, it's also still just a bridge that we're adding. We're just adding another bridge. It's just working like an extended switch. So we had one switch sitting at our data center or POP, and we've got another switch now sitting at the customer premises so that we can now effectively span services across. So I'll add my bridge, enable the VLAN filtering. I'll add my ports. So Ether 1 is going in, and I accidentally disabled that, so don't do that. And then we've got Ether 2 as well, which I'll add. And I also had Ether 3. Now, technically, you don't need to have multiple ports and stuff. I just kind of wanted to demonstrate that you can hand off different services on different interfaces, but you could also just tag it towards the same interface to the customer, and it works fine as well. But let's get back on here. So what I want to do is I'm going to say Ether 2, if I go into its VLAN, I'm going to untag this for VLAN 10 now, because that's the service that I'm delivering to the customer. And we're not going to enable tag stacking in this instance, unless we were stacking at the customer side, but in this instance, we're not doing tag stacking. And I'm also going to untag VLAN 20 to Ether 3. And now the fun bit comes. Now we can define our VLANs. And now I'm going to actually just tag VLAN 10. Sorry, I could have done it when I configured the untag as well. Oh, but I've created it dynamically. There you can see it. It actually adds the untagged like this for us if we don't define a tag. But I could just quickly grab this, copy it, and then I can specify that I'm tagging VLAN 10 on Ether 1. And I'm also tagging VLAN 20 on Ether 1, because that is just the port that it's going across. So Ether 1 is tagged for VLAN 10, which is that inner tag going towards the aggregation switch, and then the aggregation switch kind of just associates that 10 on that port with VLAN 101 and pushes it to the PE. So let's just do the same. Actually, both has been done already. So now we can kind of test this out and see if it works by jumping onto the CPE. And I can get onto the CPE also just via Winbox quickly. So CPE2, do a little connection here. And I'm not going to fill in a password for this, but I'll zoom in. And now we can put the proof in the pudding quickly. I'm just going to add some IP addresses to the interfaces. So I've got 10, I think it's 202/30 on Ether 1. And then 10.212/30 on Ether 2. Let's just have a look at our topology. Yes, Ether 1 and Ether 2 has their respective links. So that is fine. So if I go back to the CPE, let's quickly test. Let's see, can I ping 10.201? Yay, we can. So we have now effectively deployed QnQ services from a Juniper provider edge via access switches towards our customer edge or our EDD respectively, and it kind of just showcases the different methods of how you can achieve this using the tag stacking option on the switch and the bridge settings. Now this is going to be where I'll end off the video. I think I've shown you a ton of information. It might be a bit much to go over, but I do highly recommend playing along with, put it maybe in EVNG, set the settings up, see how it functions, because this is it. This is the configuration, works really well. And I'd like to thank you guys for watching. Or see you in the next video. Have a good time. Bye-bye.